The crowd gasped. The tourist grabbed the guard's hat. In the same instant, the soldier stepped forward and the royal security officer was already approaching. The tourist froze. He had just made a fatal mistake. London, Buckingham Palace. The day was overcast, but the palace gates were still surrounded by tourists, mesmerized by the motionless guards in their traditional red uniforms and massive fur hats. People whispered among themselves, pointing at the soldiers' stern faces, while others recorded videos, hoping to capture even the slightest movement from these living statues. One man stood out from the crowd, a tall, lean guy in his early 40s, tanned with a short beard. He wore a blue jacket, casually unbuttoned, and a pair of worn-out jeans. His eyes gleamed with alcohol, and there was a smug defiance in his expression. He swayed lazily on his feet as if the entire scene before him was meant for his entertainment. "Hey guys, watch this!" he shouted loudly, drawing the attention of not just his friends, but also the people around him. Several heads turned. Some raised their eyebrows in surprise, while others instinctively pulled out their phones, sensing that this guy was about to put on a show. The atmosphere shifted instantly, from casual curiosity to a growing sense of tension. The man smirked, clearly enjoying the attention, and slowly pushed forward through the crowd. His movements were slightly sluggish but confident. He walked straight toward the nearest guard, locking eyes with him as if daring him to react. The guard, a fair-skinned man in his 30s, tall and with sharp features hidden beneath the massive bearskin hat, stood like a statue. His red uniform was flawlessly pressed, his white gloves tightly gripping the rifle positioned at an exact angle. His gaze remained fixed straight ahead, calm, unshaken, and devoid of emotion. The tourist stopped just inches away, tilting his head as if inspecting an exhibit in a museum. "What's up, buddy? You're not even gonna blink?" he drawled with a grin. The guard didn't flinch. The crowd fell silent. A few nervous chuckles escaped, but most people watched with unease. The air felt thick with anticipation. For a few seconds, the man waited for any sort of reaction. When none came, his smug grin only widened. He turned to the crowd and, smirking, said, "Oh, come on. He's just a mannequin in a fancy uniform." The crowd stirred again. Some people laughed, others murmured. Fueled by their attention, the tourist suddenly lifted both hands and grabbed the guardsman's hat, slowly tugging it upward. The crowd gasped. Muffled voices echoed through the air. "No way! Is he crazy? He's gonna regret this." But the man wasn't listening. He was too caught up in his own antics, convinced he was making the day more entertaining. It never even crossed his mind that everything was about to change. The moment the man's fingers touched the fur of the hat, the air seemed to freeze. "Step back!" The guardsman suddenly stepped forward, his movements sharp and precise, like a soldier trained for action. The man in the blue jacket didn't even have time to process what was happening. His body instinctively recoiled. A deep "ooh" rippled through the crowd, like the rumble of distant thunder. People exchanged glances, some biting their lips, while others looked visibly uneasy. But instead of realizing the gravity of the situation, the tourist chuckled. His drunken arrogance took over. A flicker of defiance danced in his eyes. He was convinced he had just become the star of the show. "Oh, he can move," he laughed, dramatically dusting off his jacket as if he had just been insulted. He glanced around, seeking approval. A few nervous chuckles could be heard, but the majority of the crowd remained tense. Some tourists continued recording. Others whispered among themselves, but the atmosphere had changed. The fun was gone, replaced by a growing discomfort. "Come on, man, smile at least." He turned back to the guard as if expecting him to play along in some sort of comedy act. But the guard didn't move. The massive bearskin hat made him look even more imposing, and his unwavering gaze, fixed straight ahead, made him seem almost inhuman. And suddenly, that hit the tourist in a way he didn't expect. A strange feeling crept in, something unpleasant. There was something cold, unbreakable about this man's discipline. It was as if he didn't even acknowledge the tourist's existence. He had tried to turn this into a joke, to be the center of attention, but this soldier simply stood there. A spark of irritation flared in his chest, and his grin twisted into something more aggressive. "Maybe I should help you relax a little, huh?" he muttered, stepping forward even closer, right in the guard's face. Still, the guardsman didn't react. But this was no longer just a fool messing with a professional. This was a direct challenge, and the tourist had no intention of backing down. The crowd held its breath. No one knew how this was going to end, but one thing was certain. This guy had just crossed the line. "Step back!" The guard's voice was no longer just firm. It carried a cold, unyielding steel. It sliced through the air like a blade, instantly making the crowd tense up. For a moment, even the wind seemed to still, and the sounds of the city grew distant. The guardsman remained motionless, like a statue carved from stone, but a barely perceptible tension had settled in his posture. His face was hidden beneath the massive bearskin hat, but something about the way he stood made it clear. His patience was wearing thin. The tourist froze. He clearly hadn't expected this man, whom he had just seen as a living decoration, to speak in such a tone. For a split second, doubt flickered inside him. Something deep and instinctive stirred in his chest, an ancient primal fear of someone bigger, stronger, and clearly not playing games. But instead of backing down, he resorted to his usual tactic, arrogance. His drunken overconfidence took over. The man scoffed, straightened up, puffed out his chest, and tilted his head slightly, as if considering something. "Or what?" He sneered, staring directly into the guard's face. The crowd gasped. For a brief moment, it felt like the whole world had stopped breathing. Even those who had been chuckling earlier fell silent, realizing that what was happening now was anything but smart. Some tourists quickly put their phones away. Others, however, raised their cameras higher, eager to capture what would happen next. But the guard didn't reply. He simply stepped forward, not aggressively, no sudden movements. But that step carried absolute authority. The tourist instinctively flinched. His body jerked backward as if his own instincts were trying to pull him out of danger. But his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. The crowd held its breath. The man's eyes flashed with irritation. He couldn't just let this soldier intimidate him like that. "You think you're tough, huh?" He muttered under his breath, shaking his head. He stepped forward again, chest nearly touching the guards. And then, footsteps. Clear, loud, inevitable. The crowd turned their heads. From behind the barrier, a tall man in a black uniform emerged. He moved slowly, but there was a sense of absolute confidence in his stride. A royal security officer. He was lean, fair-skinned, with sharp, chiseled features. His black cap cast a shadow over his icy eyes. His perfectly pressed black jacket bore the Royal Guard insignia, its silver gleam acting like a silent warning. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. But every step carried the weight of authority. He stopped in front of the tourist, took a brief moment to assess him, reading the situation, measuring the threat, and then, in a voice that was calm yet impossibly firm, said, "Sir, step away from the guard, now." His voice wasn't loud, but it was final. The crowd murmured. Someone let out a quiet whistle. Others lowered their phones, sensing that the situation had just escalated into something far more serious. The tourist stood frozen. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. This wasn't an actor in a costume. This wasn't part of some tourist attraction. This was a man with real authority, a man who wasn't here to joke, a man who, at this very moment, was deciding his fate. Silence hung heavy in the air. Everyone was waiting. What would he do next? The crowd stood still. The royal security officer faced the tourist, his cold stare leaving no room for negotiation. The guard had already resumed his motionless stance, as if nothing had happened, but the situation was far from over. The tourist swallowed hard. The laughter, the fun, the sense of control, all of it had vanished. Now, he felt only one thing: pressure. His blue jacket suddenly felt too warm, even in the cool air. Awkwardly, he raised his hands, as if to show he meant no harm, and mumbled with forced nonchalance, "I was just joking, man." The officer didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He didn't even blink. His posture remained unshaken, unwavering, and his eyes held no frustration, no anger, just the cold, professional weight of duty. And somehow, that was even worse. You assaulted a Queen's Guard. That's not a joke. The crowd gasped. Someone whistled under their breath. Others exchanged nervous glances. The tension in the air was almost palpable. For the first time, the tourist's face showed something other than arrogance. Realization. This was no longer a harmless prank. He opened his mouth to say something, but suddenly his throat felt dry, and his chest felt tight. Seriously? For a hat? He tried to laugh it off. No one laughed. Not even his friends. Those same friends who had cheered him on moments ago. Now, they looked away, pretending not to know him. One of them stared at his phone. The other shuffled uncomfortably. The crowd wasn't looking at him as a funny drunk tourist anymore. They were looking at an idiot who had just walked himself into a trap. His knees felt slightly weak. "Sir, you are coming with me." The officer took a step forward. That step sealed the deal. Calm, steady, inevitable. The man hesitated. His breathing became shallow. Panic was creeping up his spine, slow but unstoppable. His eyes darted to the crowd, searching for support. All he saw were dozens of phones, recording every second, every expression on his face, every embarrassing moment. He had just become an internet joke. His jaw clenched, his insides twisted. He let out a frustrated sigh. Damn it. The crowd erupted. Some people clapped, others laughed. A few just shook their heads. "That's what you get for being an idiot, mate," someone with a thick British accent called out, earning a few chuckles. The officer gripped the man's elbow, firm but controlled. He didn't force him, but there was no doubt. This man was leaving. Resistance was pointless. The guard, like a living monument, remained in place, as if nothing had ever happened. His face remained emotionless, his head never turning. Justice was served.